Let's talk about getting this guitar sound and amp sound for a minute here. Okay, there's a few things going on here that I think you ought to know about that probably are not obvious to you. The first is that although this sounds on the surface like clean guitar, it's not clean by any means. There's a really pretty strong crunch in there. And half of that's created by my picking really hard, but the other half is created by the preamp being cranked up pretty high. So you get a little bit of distortion in there. Now, when you're playing at a low volume, and you can't really play that loud, you can't crank the amp really loud enough to get the crunch and distortion that you want. So what I've done in this case is I've added a little bit of a compressor, compressed sound to it, which beefs up the sustain and pushes the preamp a little bit so you get a little bit more of overdrive sound, so you can get a little bit of rock and roll crunch at a low volume. If you're playing loud, just dime the amp, just spin everything up to 10, but most of us can't do that. So just add a little compressor. I think that will help your sound. The other thing that we're using here is a room reverb. I don't know if you can hear it. For most times, guitar players, the reverb of choice is a plate reverb. But you got to remember in the 50s there was no plate reverbs. There was basically what happened for reverb is they recorded in a small tile room, sometimes even a bathroom. Most of the times the studios were made out of some kind of porcelain or ceramic tile, so you had a natural small room ambience, which created a small room reverb. So if you have that kind of a pedal and you can change the reverb types, go to a room and use a small room. It'll give you a nice, tight, ambient, natural sound. The last thing that we're using here is a bit of delay. Now, if you can hear this, but it's really quick, one repeat in this case, I'm using 107 milliseconds with the feedback at 0, so you get one repeat. And you can hear that the repeated sound is about half as loud as the original. So it's back there, and it's not really to give a delayed sound. It's just to make a small sound bigger. In other words, the two notes occur so close together that it sounds like one larger note instead of two notes played separately. Sounds like ba. That's the idea, to make the small sound bigger. And that's the reason I would use a small delay in here. Now, in the 1950s, whenever this was recorded, 60s, whenever, there was no foot pedals or anything, and most of this reverbs and delay sounds were added after the fact. So basically, old Chuck Berry would plug directly into some kind of an old, whatever they had back then, no reverb, no nothing, and just play loud. And that's how he got his sound.